The Spanish Inquisition remains one of the darkest and most misunderstood chapters in European history, a time where fear ruled the streets, superstition guided decisions, and countless innocent women were accused, judged, and punished under the cloak of religious righteousness. In those dim candlelit chambers, whispers of witchcraft, heresy, and disobedience were enough to drag a woman from her home into the cold stone halls of interrogation. The inquisitors believed salvation could be scared or forced into the human soul, and because of this twisted concept, a series of torture devices were invented not only to terrify but to purify. First among them was the infamous strappado, a seemingly simple rope device where a woman's wrists were tied behind her back, and she was lifted from the ground until her shoulders threatened to tear. It was designed to force confessions without shedding blood, because ironically, bloodshed was considered too cruel. Prisoners would scream, joints would crack, and yet the interrogators calmly asked their questions, believing pain could unlock truth. Another dreaded instrument was the iron gag, clamped into the mouth like a cruel lock to silence prayers or pleas, its cold metal pressing against the tongue, leaving bruises and sometimes tearing flesh when tightened. Still more disturbing was the torture chair, lined with hundreds of iron spikes on the seat, back, and arms. A woman forced to sit upon it would be strapped down, unable to move while the slightest shift embedded spikes deeper into her skin. This device, like many others, served less as punishment and more as psychological warfare, breaking hope long before the body. The inquisitors justified every scream with scripture, believing they guarded the soul against eternal damnation. Perhaps the most symbolically terrifying device was the Iron Maiden, a sarcophagus-shaped wardrobe lined with inward-facing spikes. Although some historians debate how often it was actually used, its legend alone frightened countless women into confessing crimes they never committed. Many victims were accused not for deeds but for independence, intelligence, or refusing to follow certain expectations of obedience. These qualities threatened the social order, so suspicion easily turned to accusation. The Spanish Inquisition also used humiliation as a weapon. Women were paraded in public wearing heavy shame cloaks, forced to confess and display their sins for all to see, while crowds whispered and judged, reinforcing fear through spectacle. Another feared device was the rack, stretching the body slowly until muscles tore and bones threatened to dislocate, often used while inquisitors interrogated calmly. If the prisoner confessed, great. If she did not, she was stretched further. In a grim twist, many women confessed to impossible crimes simply to make the agony stop, begging for mercy that rarely came. Not every torture was physical. Cold, damp prison cells, hunger, isolation, and endless darkness wore down the spirit. Women, especially those who whispered herbal remedies, studied the stars, or healed the sick, were accused of witchcraft because differing knowledge threatened authority. The psychological pressure was relentless. There were no lawyers, no appeals, just the cold stare of men who believed pain equaled truth. And yet, amid horror, there were sparks of courage. Some women held firm to their innocence, praying softly through cracked lips, whispering forgiveness for their tormentors, believing heaven saw what earthly courts refused. Over time, whispers of injustice spread across Spain, and slowly society questioned these methods. Scholars, philosophers, even clergy began to challenge the belief that torture revealed truth. The Enlightenment eventually dawned, bringing sparks of reason and human rights, and the Inquisition's power faded. Today, museums quietly display replicas of these devices, their silent metal surfaces reminding us how fear can twist morality. Modern historians teach these stories not to glorify suffering, but to warn future generations against the dangers of blind obedience, strict dogma, and unchecked authority. As you listen to these historical accounts, remember that history often repeats when forgotten. Behind every cold device was a real person, with dreams, families, and laughter. Women who never deserved the agony forced upon them. Their stories urge us to stand up when justice falters, to speak when silence becomes complicity, and to value compassion over control. If you found this chapter eye-opening, powerful, and worth learning from, then stay with us because history holds many more truths hidden in shadows. And if you want to keep exploring forgotten stories, shocking facts, and lessons no classroom ever taught, as the years of the Spanish Inquisition progressed, fear became a silent language spoken by every woman who dared to think differently, and new methods of intimidation emerged that relied less on blood and more on dread. One such device was the scavenger's daughter, a cruel iron frame that folded the body into a painful crouch, forcing knees to chest and head downward until breathing became a struggle, leaving many women dizzy, trembling, and desperate. Another feared tool was the heretic's fork, a metal-pronged collar placed between the chest and chin, forcing the victim to hold her head upright for hours or risk stabbing her own flesh. Even the simple motion of sleep became impossible, turning exhaustion into torture. Sometimes the inquisitors preferred psychological pressure, endless interrogations, sudden accusations, and the terrifying sound of metal being prepared in the next room. Fear itself doing the work before pain ever began. Women would tremble at tales of the boot, a device that crushed the legs with wooden wedges, splintering bone slowly, used not to kill, but to terrify others into silence. Many confessions were spoken between tears, not because guilt existed, but because the human spirit could only endure so much before breaking. Outside the dungeon, society watched carefully, understanding that even whispering doubt could bring suspicion to their door. Neighbors turned on neighbors, fear poisoning friendships. Records show that faint hope sometimes appeared when bishops or scholars questioned the morality of such cruelty, but their voices were small compared to the loud machinery of fear. Over time, however, the world began to change. Science challenged superstition, and humanity questioned whether punishment could ever lead to truth. Today we remember these devices not to glamorize pain, but to honor those who suffered and to ensure we never allow fear to rule faith again. And if you want to continue uncovering hidden history, don't forget to subscribe and join us as we bring forgotten stories back to light.